Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the Supreme Being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in the Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have received correspondence from Her Excellency the President, Christine Carla Kangaloo, ORTT, advising of the following. Instruments of temporary appointment in accordance with Section 44 of the Constitution. Revocation of the temporary appointment of Mr. Daniel Rashid, serving during the absence of Senator Brian Bigg, and temporary appointment of Mr. Ashworth Jack during the absence of Senator Brian Bigg due to illness. Honorable Senators, a senator is required to take the oath. Could we all stand?
I, Ashworth Jack, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, which I am about to assume.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives. The Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill 2026 in the name of the Attorney General. Papers.
The Attorney General.
Mr. President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers listed on the order paper in my name. The Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Declaration of Treaty Order 2026.
Minister of Planning, Economic Affairs and Development, and Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Mr. President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The Proceeds of Crime, Seized Assets Fund Use Order 2026. The annual audited financial statements as follows. The National Flour Mills Limited for the year ended December 31st, 2024. The National Enterprise Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2025. The National Payments and Innovation Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2025. The National Information and Communication Technology Company for the financial year ended September 30th, 2025. Evolving Technologies and Enterprise Development Company Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2023. The audited financial statements of the Rural Development Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial years ended September 30th, 2023 and 2024, and the annual report on audited financial statements of accounts of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended September 30th, 2025.
Questions on notice? Questions for oral answer?
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I'm very happy to announce that the government is ready to answer all 6 questions for oral answer appearing on today's order paper. And in addition, the 1 question for written answer, that's number 66, has been sent to the clerk for circulation.
Senator Melanie Roberts Rajman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 49 to the Minister of Defense.
Minister of Defense.
Mr. President, the answer to Roman numeral 1 is yes. The answer to Roman numeral number 2 is ongoing, and as a result, Roman number 3 is OTOs.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. In terms, follow-up question, please. In terms of the answer to number 2, in terms of it being ongoing, is the Honourable Minister willing to disclose the findings to date, or at least more details on the actual status?
I don't know if the Minister want to go there, but he says it's ongoing, but it's up to the Minister. Minister?
It is ongoing. There are no findings just yet.
Honourable Senator, any further?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Go to number 56. Senator Dr. Desiree Marie.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 56 to the Minister of the People, Social Development and Family Services.
The People, Social Development and Family Services.
Mr. President, on behalf of my line minister, the Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services advises that public awareness campaigns aimed at preventing child separation are conducted through the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, with complementary public outreach and family support engagement undertaken by the National Family Services Division, and that established child protection intervention protocols are implemented to safeguard vulnerable children, including children with disabilities or special needs in crowded public settings. More specifically, please note the following. 1. The Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services, through the Children's Authority, conducts public awareness campaigns aimed at preventing child separation and safeguarding children during large-scale national events and other high-activity periods. Preventative public education forms a key component of the Children's Authority Child Protection Strategy. Campaigns are typically implemented during major holiday periods and national events such as Easter, the July-August school vacation, Christmas, New Year, and Carnival, when many children may be at increased risk. During Carnival, the Trinidad and Tobago Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago implements a targeted safety campaign entitled Before You Ramage, Make Sure the Children Okay. This campaign emphasizes the responsibility of parents and guardians to ensure that children are properly supervised and that appropriate childcare arrangements are in place prior to attending carnival activities. The campaign disseminates practical child safety guidance through social media messaging, radio and television advertisements, media interviews, and public engagement activities. Messaging encourages caregivers to maintain active supervision of children in crowded environments, establish pre-arranged meeting points in case of separation, and ensure children know a parent's or guardian's contact information and consider a child's age and specific vulnerabilities when making supervision decisions. The Children's Authority also collaborates with partner organizations, including the Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross, to reinforce child safety messaging during carnival activities involving children. These efforts have included the provision of identification name tags for children participating in parades and public engagement booths where staff interact directly with parents and children to promote child safety and parental responsibility. In addition, the National Family Services Division supports public education outreach initiatives by providing information on available social services at community engagement events. 2, the Children's Authority is the primary statutory agency responsible for responding to reports of children who may be in need of care and protection. Where a child is identified as vulnerable or separated from their caregiver, the authority's established intervention protocols are initiated to ensure immediate safeguarding. These measures may include emergency investigation and intervention, medical attention where required, the provision of psychological first aid, temporary placement where parents or guardians cannot be located, and reunification where it is determined to be in the best interests of the child. All interventions are guided by comprehensive clinical assessments and the best interest of the child principle, and these safeguards apply equally to children with disabilities or special needs, ensuring that protective and supportive interventions are provided where required. The National Family Service Division provides complementary support services through longer-term family case management where required to ensure that families receive the appropriate assistance and support.
Okay, Senator, do you have any?
Thank you for that very comprehensive and reassuring answer.
Thank you. Senator Melanie Roberts-Rajman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 58 to the Minister of Education.
The Minister of Education.
Mr. President, I thank the member for the question. The answer to part 1. For the period September to December 2025, there were 1,050 reported cases of student suspension across the education system. I also wish to indicate that no student was expelled during this period. The ministry does not treat suspension as arbitrary punishment. Suspension is used where behavior threatens the safety, order, and proper functioning of the school environment, but it is governed by clear procedures, due process, and proportionality. The framework is provided by the National School Code of Conduct, which is available on the ministry's website. The answer to part 2. Mr. President, this government's position is clear. Violence in schools will not be normalized, excused, or ignored. At the same time, we recognize that discipline must be accompanied by rehabilitation, intervention, and prevention. Accordingly, students who are suspended or otherwise identified as being at risk of continued behavioral difficulties were referred to the Student Support Services Division for targeted support. That support includes psychological and behavioral assessments, individual and family counseling, behavior intervention plans, anger management support, conflict resolution support, and structured reintegration arrangements for students returning after suspension. School social workers and guidance officers also engage families directly to address the underlying social and behavioral issues affecting students. In more serious cases, the ministry also applies case management, monitoring, and referral mechanisms, including referral to specialized services and relevant external agencies where required. So, Mr. President, the approach is not simply to remove a student from school and leave the matter there. The objective is to correct behavior, protect the wider school population, and reduce repeat incidents. And that is exactly why at the Ministry of Education we have acted. We have reviewed and strengthened the National School Code of Conduct so that schools now have a clearer, more modern, and more consistent framework for dealing with indiscipline and serious misconduct, while still preserving due process and the best interests of the child. We have also implemented the Police in School initiative in high-risk secondary schools because this government is not prepared to leave principals, teachers, and students to face serious violence without additional support. That initiative forms a part of a broader school safety strategy aimed at deterrence, improved supervision, early intervention, and greater stability in the learning environment. So the difference is this, Mr. President. This ministry is not merely talking about school violence. The ministry is acting to confront it. We are taking a balanced but firm approach, firm where the safety of students and staff is threatened, and supportive where intervention is needed to help a young person return to a better path. We will protect the school environment, support rehabilitation, and continue strengthening the systems needed to restore discipline, safety, and confidence in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the Honorable Minister for your answer. I have a follow-up, but I imagine that it would be a response that might need to be submitted in writing if that's fine with the Minister. With regards to the Police in Schools initiative in the schools identified as high risk, if the Minister can indicate in writing the statistics, the figures showing any changes in the incidence of suspensions in those high-risk schools since the initiative was implemented last September, I would be grateful, please, Mr. President.
Well, listen, I think that just frame your question, don't make a statement. Leave it up to the minister to respond, and if he wishes to put it in writing, he will so indicate. But he has a right to respond to your question now. So could you just put your question pointedly to the minister and allow him to respond? Take another try at it for me.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can the minister indicate in writing the changes, any changes seen to the incidence of suspensions in schools identified as high risk where the Police in School initiative has been implemented?
I don't think you would ask the minister to do that in writing. You have to ask a follow-up question to what has been put before you by the minister. You're asking the minister to put it in writing. First, put your question, and maybe you can have a follow-up by asking him to put it in writing, but you must first get your question. So could you try it again?
Mr. President, can the minister indicate any changes in the number of suspensions that have been seen in those schools that have been identified as high risk, where the Police in Schools initiative has been implemented?
Thank you. Honorable Minister.
Mr. President, yes, definitely, especially during the critical periods of break time, lunchtime, and after schools. There has been a significant reduction in suspensions and incidents of violence.
Any further?
No further follow-ups, Mr. President.
All right. I think the other question is Senator Janelle John Bates.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 59 to the Minister of Culture and Community Development.
The Honorable Minister of Culture and Community Development.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank the Senator for this question, which affords me the opportunity to place on record the scope and scale of the Flavor Village initiative during the Carnival season 2026, and the government's continued commitment to investing in our cultural practitioners. Mr. President, the Flavor Village initiative is a flagship cultural activation that serves as a hub for the display and celebration of our art forms. It operated from the 8th of January 2026 to the 1st of March 2026, spanning the full breadth of the Carnival season. Mr. President, during the period of operation, approximately in excess of 500 performers were engaged across a wide cross-section of our cultural landscape. These included a host of artists, the details of which, Mr. President, is going to be circulated or placed on record here today in an appendix. Mr. President, I wish to underscore that this initiative provided meaningful paid employment to approximately over 500 cultural practitioners across the length of the Carnival season. That is the statement of this government's commitment to the creative economy and to the livelihoods of those that keep our traditions alive. Mr. President, the contractual amount of each engagement was determined on the basis of negotiated industry pricing and the duration of the respective performance. I wish to outline for the Honorable Senate the ranges applicable to each category of performer. Live bands were engaged at rates ranging from $20,000 to $60,000. Steel bands were similarly engaged from rates engaging $12,000 to $60,000. Calypso, soca, chutney, rapso artists performing without a live band were engaged respective rates $1,500 to $40,000. Rhythm sections, tassa groups, tambu bamboo groups were engaged on an average $4,000 to $7,000. Disc jockeys ranged from $2,000 to $4,500. Hosts, masters of ceremonies were engaged from $2,500 to $7,000. Steel pan soloists from $800 to $4,000. With respect to traditional carnival characters, Mr. President, individual characters such as baby dolls were engaged at approximately $700 per individual, while group engagements such as Moko Jumbies and Blue Devils attract fees of $5,000 per group. These ranges, Mr. President, reflect the estimated or established market rates for cultural practitioners in Trinidad and Tobago, and we negotiated accordingly. Mr. President, the Flavor Village initiative concluded its operations on the 1st of March 2026. I can advise this Honorable Senate as follows. The majority of payments in respect of engagements during the month of January 2026 have been paid in full. Payments with respect to February 2026 engagements are currently being processed. To date, however, 90% of artists have received payment. All payments to the various categories of performers are expected to be completed on or before the 31st of May 2026. Mr. President, I wish to assure this Senate and the cultural practitioners of Trinidad and Tobago that the government is fully committed to honoring every contractual obligation arising from the Flavor Village initiative. Every performer who rendered a service will be paid. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question? All right. You have any supplemental? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Minister. Minister, could you state whether the financing for the project will be taken from budgetary allocations or through borrowing?
Just repeat that question first. No, you.
Repeat the question.
Senator Vishnu, yeah.
Minister, could you state whether the financing for the Flavor project will be taken from budgetary allocation or through borrowing?
I don't think that question arises. If you have another question, you could come again. Any further questions? No? Okay, well, let's move on. I'll now invite again Senator Melanie Roberts-Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 64 to the Minister of Works and Infrastructure.
Works and Infrastructure.
Mr. President, I rise to answer question 64 on behalf of the Honorable Minister of Works and Infrastructure. Mr. President, the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure has policy oversight and overall responsibility for matters relating to the Sea Bridge, which serves as a critical economic and social link between Trinidad and Tobago. However, the day-to-day operational management of port facilities and the direct engagement of maritime workers fall within the purview of the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, which functions as the executing agency. Response to Part 1. The individuals referenced were not employees of the Port Authority, and as such, they did not hold employment contracts with the authority. In this regard, they were not engaged by the Port Authority to provide services on the Blue Wave Harmony. Response to Part 2. Termination processes apply only to individuals who are employed by Port Authority. As the individuals referenced were not employees of the authority, no termination letters or notices of termination were issued by the Port Authority. Response to Part 3. Engagement by the Port Authority applies only to individuals who hold employment or contractual status within the authority. As the individuals referenced did not hold such status, the question of continuing or re-engaging them by the Port Authority does not arise. Employees who are engaged in the cargo operations of the Port Authority continue to be employed by the Port Authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one follow-up for the Honorable Minister. Minister, can you indicate the employer of the employees or who engaged the employees we are referring to in the question?
The information.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you. Senator Dr. Amery Browne.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 65 to the Minister of Health.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. President, I thank the member for this question. The answer to Part 1, as at March 10, 2026, the total number of Cuban healthcare professionals working in Trinidad and Tobago is 58 persons. In response to Part 2, the breakdown of the categories of the 58 Cuban healthcare professionals is as follows. Doctors, 4, nurses, 53, administrative coordinator, 1, making up the total of 58. And the answer to Part 3 is that this matter is under consideration. Thank you.
Senator Browne.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with respect to the Minister's response to Part 3, which really inquired on whether the government intends to fill any vacancies with Cuban healthcare providers. Is there any other nationality of healthcare provider that the minister is looking to recruit at this time?
I'm not too sure that question arises based on the response that the minister has given. And if you want to probably rephrase your question as it relates to his actual response to your question.
Well, Mr. President, it's a challenge, but is the minister willing to share any of the factors that are being considered by the ministry in its determination, its ongoing determination of the recruitment of Cuban healthcare professionals?
Honorable Minister, you willing to?
President, that question has been asked and answered. The matter is under consideration.
Okay. Any further questions? No? That's good.
Introduction of bills. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Republic of Chile Partial Scope Trade Agreement Bill 2026 in the name of the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
Mr. President, in accordance with Standing Order 62(1)B, I beg to move that the next stage of the bill be taken late in the proceedings.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the next stage of the bill be taken later in the proceedings. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think that, okay. Division.
Mr. Alaha?
Yes.
Mr. Jeremy Essie?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Dr. Swarat Singh?
Yes.
Mr. Maharaj?
Yes.
Mr. Batiste?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mr. Ratiram?
Yes.
Professor Prasad?
Yes.
Dr. Chaitan Maharaj?
Yes.
Ms. Charles?
Yes.
Mr. Zakur?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Naked?
Yes.
Mr. Jack?
Yes.
Dr. Browne?
No.
Mrs. Roberts Rajman?
No.
Mr. Dan Paul?
No.
Mr. Cummings?
No.
Mrs. John Bates?
No.
Mr. Arawi Essie?
No.
Mr. Vieira Essie?
Abstain.
Ms. Chote Essie?
Yes.
Dr. Attzs?
Yes.
Mr. Dilabastide Essie?
No.
Ms. Joan Simmons?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
No.
Dr. Murray?
No.
Mrs. Lalit Etienne?
Abstain.
Mr. President, the result of the division is as follows. 18 members voted for, 9 members voted against, and 2 members abstained.
Honorable members, as a result, the result of the division is as follows. 18 members voted for the motion, 9 members voted against the motion, and there were 2 members who abstained. The motion is carried. The motion is carried, and the next stage of the bill will be taken later in the proceedings.
The Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Amendment Bill 2026 in the name of the Minister of Labour, Small and Micro Enterprise Development. Public Business, Government Business, Bills second reading.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Give Effect to the Partial Scope Trade Agreement between the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile and for related matters be now read a second time. Mr. President, it is an honor for me to return to this Honorable Senate since being elected a Member of Parliament in the House of Representatives to pilot the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile Partial Scope Trade Agreement Bill 2026. As a matter of fact, just last week I had the opportunity to pilot my first piece of legislation in the lower house, the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill 2026. And now today, in under 5 days, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile Partial Scope Trade Agreement Bill 2026 in this Honorable Senate. Mr. President, through this bill, there are only 7, though this bill, there are only 7 clauses. They are of importance to advancing Trinidad and Tobago's commercial relationship with South America, in particular the Republic of Chile. The bill provides for the implementation of the Partial Scope Trade Agreement signed between the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile on April 25, 2025. Clause 1 provides a customary short title of the legislation, while Clause 2 provides for the Act to commence upon proclamation by the President. Clause 3 provides for the interpretation of certain terms in the legislation, namely the terms, agreement, and minister. Clause 4 makes provisions for the agreement to have the force of law. Clause 5 of the bill provides for the President to grant tariff preferences set out in Annex 2B of the agreement for goods originating from Chile. However, as Clause 5.2 of the bill explains, the preferential treatment shall apply only to goods which satisfy Chapter 3 and the annexes of the agreement. Clause 6 provides for the Minister with the assigned responsibility to amend the schedule to the legislation by order, specifically by negative resolution of Parliament, there being only one schedule, which is the actual text of the Partial Scope Trade Agreement with its articles and annexes. Finally, Clause 7 of the bill provides for the Minister to make regulations subject to negative resolution of Parliament. Mr. President, I would like to now touch on the provisions of the Partial Scope Trade Agreement. Mr. President, even though it is not the job of the legislature to negotiate nor amend trade agreements, permit me in the interest of transparency to explain the actual provisions of the agreement which are contained in the schedule to the legislation. Part of the PTSA, the preamble, this serves as a background to the PSTA and an affirmation by the parties of their common objectives. Chapter 1, the initial provisions, This chapter refers to the establishment of the partial scope trade agreement and its objectives and the scope and coverage. Chapter 2, Trade in Goods. This chapter and its annexes includes the schedules of tariff commitments with the lists of goods set out by the parties' commitments in respect of the trade in goods covered under the PSCA, including the extent to which and how quickly duties are lowered and or removed. Chapter 3, which deals with the rules of origin. This chapter speaks to the identification and treatment of goods that would be eligible for preferential market access under the PSCA. Chapter 4, the Cooperation Trade Facilitation. This chapter aims to streamline customs procedures and make them more efficient. Chapter 5, Trade Remedies. This chapter refers to the measures that one party can take in response to the negative effects of unfair trade practices, such as dumping, unlawful subsidies, and surges in imports. Chapter 6, Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures. This chapter sets out the rules for food safety and animal and plant health in respect of the trade in goods between the parties and establishes mechanisms for technical consultations and the exchange of information. Chapter 7, Technical Barriers to Trade. This chapter provides for the recognition of standards, technical regulations, and conformity assessment procedures, and the cooperation and exchange of information in respect of standards, technical regulations, meteorological measures, and accreditation systems. Chapter 8, Competition Policy. This chapter sets out undertakings in respect of the application of competition law and commitments for cooperation in competition policy. Chapter 9, Transparency. This chapter ensures transparency in respect of laws, regulations, and administrative rulings in respect of matters covered under the PSTA. Chapter 10, Institutional Arrangements. This chapter provides for the establishment/creation of key bodies under the PSTA, their functions, and how they are to meet. Chapter 11, Dispute Settlement Procedures. This chapter and its annexes provide measures for resolving any disputes that may arise under the PSTA. Chapter 12, Exceptions. This chapter speaks to the rights of the parties not to apply provisions of the PSTA in specified circumstances by invoking general security or taxation exceptions. And Chapter 13, Final Provisions. This chapter establishes how the PSTA enters into force, opens the possibility for new parties to join after it is signed, and sets the procedures for amending the agreement in the future. What is the importance of international trade, Mr. President? Mr. President, it is a fact that international trade is a cornerstone of the global economy, and its importance can be understood across several key dimensions. The first, economic growth and development. International trade allows countries to expand their markets beyond domestic borders. By exporting goods and services, nations can increase production, create jobs, and boost income levels. Indeed, many developing countries have accelerated growth by integrating into global trade networks. 2, efficient resource allocation. Trade is based on the principle of comparative advantage, where countries specialize in producing goods they can make most efficiently. This leads to better use of global resources and higher overall productivity. 3, access to a variety of goods and services. Consumers benefit from international trade by gaining access to a wider range of products, often at lower prices. 4, technological advancements. Trade facilitates the exchange of knowledge and innovation. Countries can import advanced technologies, machinery, and expertise, helping industries modernize and improve competitiveness. 5, employment opportunities. Export-oriented industries often generate large numbers of jobs. At the same time, imports can support employment in sectors like retail, logistics, and distribution. 6, strengthening international relations. Trade encourages cooperation and interdependence among nations, which can promote peace and stability. 7. Economies of scale. Access to global markets allow firms to produce on a larger scale, reducing average costs and improving efficiency. 8. Foreign exchange earnings. Exports bring in foreign currency, which countries use to pay for imports, service debt, and stabilize their economies. Mr. President, allow me now to go through the history of Trinidad and Tobago's bilateral trade agreements. Mr. President, since the 1990s, successive governments of Trinidad and Tobago have recognized the importance of trade liberalization in the strengthening of the local economy. As such, Trinidad and Tobago has signaled bilateral agreements with several countries, including Venezuela in 1992, Colombia in 1994, the Dominican Republic in 1998, Cuba in 2000, Costa Rica in 2025. Importantly, Mr. President, this is the first PSTA being signed by Chile in the Caribbean and the first for Trinidad and Tobago with a South American nation. The new foreign policy orientation of Trinidad and Tobago is aimed at achieving the central objectives of making this country stronger, safer, and prosperous. Pursuing Trinidad and Tobago's commercial interests is now central to its foreign policy. It is about pursuing initiatives which bring tangible benefits to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, such as foreign exchange and job opportunities. This is why, during the recently concluded Shield of the Americas held in Miami on March 7, 2026, the Honorable Prime Minister Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar Senior Council prioritized engagement with several Latin American leaders, including His Excellency Jose Antonio Cast, President of Chile. Bilateral relationships with Chile. Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago and Chile share a long-standing relationship founded on mutual respect, friendship, and cooperation. Just last year, we proudly celebrated 60 years of diplomatic relations, a milestone that speaks to the enduring strength and depth of our partnership. This partial scope trade agreement builds on that legacy, reflecting our shared commitment to openness, mutual prosperity, and lasting cooperation. Mr. President, Chile is an important trading partner and a main Latin American market for Trinidad and Tobago. The average total exports from TNT to Chile over the period 2020 to 2024 are estimated at approximately Trinidad and Tobago $710.6 million per annum. This includes energy exports, which average approximately $706.3 million annually, and non-energy exports, which average approximately $4.4 million annually. The agreement provides for preferential market access for more of Trinidad and Tobago's exports. More local goods will be allowed into Chile without incurring custom duties, that is, zero duties, and assist in Trinidad and Tobago's efforts to increase both energy and non-energy exports as part of the government's continued trade expansion and economic diversification efforts. Specifically, the PSTA will provide local manufacturers with preferential access into Chile for products under 267 tariff lines. This essentially enables trade of more than 267 products, as multiple products can be covered under a single tariff line. Within the framework of the agreement, 213 tariff lines for locally manufactured products will incur 0% duty into Chile upon entry into force of the agreement, following which products under 54 tariff lines will attain duty-free treatment into Chile after 3 years. This PSTA is an opportunity to provide products to Chile, which has a market size of 19.66 million persons and the highest per-person income GDP per capita in Latin America, and belongs to the category of high-income countries according to the World Bank. The country therefore has a sizable population with strong purchasing power. Preferential market access treatment into Chile for Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector will be provided for items such as methanol, ammonia, LNG, aviation fuels, base oils, lubricants, propane, butane, and urea. In addition, the list of items from Trinidad and Tobago's non-energy sector covers duty-free treatment for food and beverage, cosmetics, chemicals, construction, paper, fashion, and energy industries. Specifically, non-energy items include alcoholic beverages, juices, pasta, cocoa products, ketchup, and other condiments, water, concrete, clothing, cosmetics, ferrous products, fruits, and vegetables, as well as doors and windows. Trinidad and Tobago imports under the agreement. Conversely, the average total imports sourced from Chile over the period 2020 to 2024 are estimated at $189 million annually. This shows interest among our domestic importers in having access to Chilean products. The PSTA will allow for reduced tariffs on products from Chile under 143 tariff lines. However, I want to emphasize that trade is more than numbers. It is about people. It is a farmer whose crops will now find new markets, the manufacturer who gains access to new customers, and the importer that can source cheaper goods from better suppliers. The small business owner who dreams bigger because new opportunities have opened up, and the consumer who will enjoy more choice, better quality, and cheaper food options. Hence, the areas such as tariff preferences, rules of origin, and origin procedures, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, and trade facilitation, which are covered under the agreement, will be more than policy tools, but will also pave the way for greater collaboration between the private sector of both our nations. Benefits of enhanced trade between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile. Mr. President, enhanced trade between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile will play a strategic role in strengthening both economies and deepening ties between this country and South America specifically. Energy and resource complementary, Trinidad and Tobago is still rich in oil, natural gas, and petrochemicals, while Chile is a major importer of energy, but rich in minerals like copper. Greater trade will allow Trinidad and Tobago to export energy products while importing raw materials or finished goods from Chile, creating a mutually beneficial exchange. Market diversification. For Trinidad and Tobago, trading with Chile will reduce the dependence on traditional partners. It will also allow for economic growth and investment. More bilateral trade will encourage investment flows, as Chilean companies would be able to invest in sectors such as infrastructure, retail, and services in Trinidad and Tobago, while Trinidadian firms can explore opportunities in Chile's mining, energy, and manufacturing sectors. There will also be access to goods and services. Consumers and businesses in both countries will benefit from a wider variety of goods. Trinidad and Tobago can import Chilean products such as wine, fruits, and machinery, while exporting fertilizers, liquefied natural gas, and manufactured goods. There will also be an element of knowledge and technology transfer. Chile has strong expertise in areas like mining technology, renewable energy, and agriculture. Enhanced trade and collaboration allow Trinidad and Tobago to benefit from this knowledge, helping diversify its economy beyond energy. Enhanced competitiveness. Exposure to international markets will push businesses in both countries to improve quality, efficiency, and innovation, making them more competitive globally. Mr. President, it is important for the government to put on record the rationale for new commercial partnerships between Trinidad and Tobago and South America. Trinidad and Tobago currently trades with all regions of the world. However, its exports are disproportionately skewed to North America, CARICOM, and Europe, which collectively account for approximately 69% of total exports. With respect to North America, Trinidad and Tobago, the percentage of exports are 37%, CARICOM 16%, Europe 16%, Asia 10%, South America, excluding Guyana and Suriname, 8%, the Caribbean, excluding CARICOM, 4%, Europe, excluding the EU, 4%, Africa, 2%, Central America, excluding Belize, 1%, and other countries, 2%, a grand total being 100%, which would be $63,144,383,930. On the import side, North America and Asia account for over 67% of total imports. Trade with South America, while strong, 8% of total exports and 10% of total imports, can be significantly enhanced given the market size of South America. Mr. President, there's a lot more that can be said in terms of Trinidad and Tobago's import sources globally, but in the interest of time, I will not touch on that. In fact, Mr. President, in anticipation of the passage of this piece of legislation in November 2025, the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association led a trade mission to Chile aimed at expanding business opportunities for local manufacturers in Latin America. That trade mission involved over 20+ delegates from 12 to 14 Trinbagonian companies from the following sectors: food and beverage, chemicals, printing and packaging, services, and manufacturing. It is my understanding that the mission was extremely successful and resulted in several new trade leads for the local private sector. This is no surprise, since while the Chilean market is significantly larger than Trinidad and Tobago, this country has a significant manufacturing base with several internationally competitive products which can succeed in that country and wider South America. Its concurrence, the current concurrence of the PTSA with the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. It should be noted that any agreement negotiated by Trinidad and Tobago requires the approval and certification of CARICOM in accordance with Article 83 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which has been incorporated into domestic law as Chapter 8111 of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, which states inter alia that bilateral agreements to be negotiated by member states in pursuance of their national strategic interests shall A, be without prejudice to their obligations under the treaty, and B, prior to their conclusion, be subject to the certification by the CARICOM Secretariat that the agreements do not prejudice nor place at a disadvantage the position of other CARICOM states vis-à-vis the treaty. Mr. President, on the 24th of April 2025, Trinidad and Tobago received the required certification from the CARICOM Secretariat, and I am advised that that ambassador, who I hold in high regard, Ambassador Wayne McCook, Assistant Secretary General of CARICOM, was instrumental in working with the government of Trinidad and Tobago to obtain the certification. Mr. President, on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, we would like to express thanks that the negotiation of the trade agreements, though tedious, intense, and extremely complicated exercise, Trinidad and Tobago's side were led in terms of negotiations by the Chief Negotiator, His Excellency Colin Connolly, former Career Ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago, who has since retired, and our new PS in the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Mr. Randall Karim, as the Deputy Chief Negotiator, who, as I said, is the PS of the Foreign Service. I also wish to thank all the technocrats in the Ministry of Trade, Finance, Agriculture, and the Office of the Attorney General who made this day possible, as tireless negotiations, legal experts and expertise, policymakers, and the teams on both sides who worked through long nights, tough issues, and competing interests to reach a balanced and fair outcome were successful. In conclusion, Mr. President, in an ever-evolving international context, the government of Trinidad and Tobago continues to be bold and proactive in seeking the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This agreement reflects a shared understanding that in a world with increasing complexity, our cooperation is not a luxury, but a necessity We live in a time where global challenges require global solutions, and beyond that, meaningful partnerships. We make no apologies for prioritizing Trinidad and Tobago's commercial and security objectives in our diplomatic pursuits, as we aptly navigate a complex international and geopolitical system. Our government will continue the necessary diplomatic approaches with key regional and international partners as we pursue pathways to sustainable development for a blessed Twin Island Republic and to secure a bright future for generations to come. With those few words, Mr. President, I beg to move.
Honorable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Give Effect to the Partial Scope Trade Agreement between the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile, and for related matters, be now read a second time. Senator Dr. Amery Browne.
Thank you, Mr. President. I must say it's a particular honor and pleasure to participate in today's debate because the subject matter is quite important to Trinidad and Tobago and our collective future as a society. Mr. President, service can be viewed as a relay. At some point, whether you're a presiding officer, a minister, a senator, a street sweeper, or anyone else, you would have to pass the baton on and hope that your contribution would have made a difference. One of the gifts of the Westminster system, Mr. President, is that sometimes there are those who interpret it as necessitating fighting. You're there to fight people, to throw insults, to battle, to tear down, etc. But, Mr. President, it is my view, it is our view, that service is about building and about uniting the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is a debate that lends itself very well to a broader view of what brings us together as a Senate. I think don't want to start on a negative note, but a little bit surprising that the minister would have piloted this bill without finding some space, even en passant, to indicate that all of the work that he elaborated in his piloting, all of it, right up to the signature of this partial scope trade agreement, occurred under the aegis of a People's National Movement administration. I don't think that would have been difficult. You would recall, Mr. President, when I engaged in examination of our Security Council bid, I did indicate a former administration put the placeholder, etc. So I just think in a debate like this, at least that should have been clear, and also to make clear that this agreement was signed last year in 2025. We didn't hear that at all. It wasn't in the narrative. So there's just that sort of, assumption that maybe all of this was a slightly more recent vintage. So, Mr. President, it seems the leader of government business has a disagreement with those facts. If he does, he has the opportunity to participate and let his voice be heard as opposed to muttering in his chair. Mr. President, so we got the negative out of the way. It is with a sense of duty that I would like to contribute a few perspectives to the Senate's and the population's understanding of what this bill and this agreement means to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and how it can assist us in moving forward. I want to say that the selection of Chile, in this instance, for the hard work that it would have taken on both sides to craft a trade agreement of this nature and this scope, and now to result in a bill to give legal effect to that agreement, was not by accident. And I'm pleased that the current government at least has carried forward with respect to bringing the bill in culmination. Mr. President, it is no exaggeration to say that Chile is a remarkable and amazing country. It is extremely diverse. It's known as the tallest country in the world just based on its latitude disposition, and one of the thinnest as well. And it's known as a tri-continental country because it's South American, it's also an Antarctic country, and it's also an oceanic state. So it's referred to as tri-continental, and that gives some advantages to Chile as a trading partner and maybe a source of some key additional resources for Trinidad and Tobago and our manufacturers. It is the #1 producer of copper in the world and the #2 producer of lithium in the world. And we all know the growing importance of lithium to trade, investment, and technology across the world. The minister did mention that there are 19.6 Chileans who would be an ideal market for Trinidad and Tobago's goods. It's also quite a diverse country. Some people don't realize that, with a strong First People and Amerindian component, lots of Venezuelan immigrants as well in Chile, and it's quite a mixed population. I was surprised as well, there are a significant number of Haitians that have made Chile their home and are well integrated into that society. So it's a cosmopolitan country with which we have some history going back officially to 1964. Mr. President, Chile is also an excellent source of some of the best fruits and vegetables in the world. And I know some of our farmers might hear that and may get a little sense of trepidation, but because the topography and climate is different to ours, the fruits that they specialize in is quite different to ours. So you can get some of the best grapes on planet Earth in Chile, some of the best apples and pears, blueberries as well, avocados. Well, they might have a little overlap with Trinidad and Tobago, but they are renowned for the quality of their avocados. Because they are an oceanographic state, the seafood input in Chile is also absolutely remarkable. So you'd have heard of Chilean sea bass and other products. Chilean beef is also quite outstanding. So just to give a little sense, this is not a random country plucked out of a hat, but really there's great strategic potential. And even with respect to our manufacturing sector, or food and beverage sector, etc., those who make fruit juices and so on, it's not just necessarily a target market, but potentially a good source of inputs and raw materials as well. So I just want to give some perspective that this is important for our future. There's also, you see, when, as the trade specialists would know, when you open doors of trade, other avenues are also open. And with respect to tourism and other potentials, this is something that bodes well for Trinidad and Tobago. In preparing for these debates, sometimes you sit down and you say, all right, what's the downside here? But in part because we were fully and comprehensively involved, but also the reality is, once we approach these things in the right way, and I think the right approach has been elaborated, then the sky really is the limit, and it's up to us and our people to get the best out of these doors that have been opened, Mr. President. So I just want to give that sense. Now, why do I talk so much about Chile? I'm not the emissary in this country, but I was the ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago, accredited to Chile for almost 5 years, visited that country a number of times, and was very impressed. The other facet of Chile is that they have an extreme, I see the minister has gone elsewhere, but they have an extremely strong diplomatic presence. So when you look at the history of Chilean ambassadors to Port of Spain, Mr. President, you may know, they were some of the most outstanding in any diplomatic corps. And again, that's not by accident. They have a very strong institution that serves to develop their diplomats, their ambassadors, all go through very rigorous training programs, etc. And so as we open the trade avenues, there are other potentials. And we have had some training of our young diplomats in association with the Chileans, but there's real room for cross-fertilization in other avenues. So the minister gave some indication of those who have worked on this trade agreement. I want to broaden that a little bit, Mr. President. I would start where he left off with a clear identification of the principal chief negotiator for the majority of this work enterprise being the outstanding former ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago. Outstanding. His Excellency Colin Connolly. He really did a marvelous job and carried a lot of this. He didn't do it on his own, and I think we may have the presence even within our precincts of the Deputy Chief Negotiator, who was permanent secretary in the Ministry of Trade and Industry and is now permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. It doesn't end there. That's Mr. Karim. It doesn't end there, Mr. President. And I could take you back to the days of Jerry Norris, Ken Valley, Mervyn Assam, and others whose work would have laid the foundation, created openings, networks, partnerships that have helped us to this particular point. Even people like Mark Loquan, Vernon Pal and others, the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, Export TT, Invest TT, and all the other parameters that would have arisen subsequently. The CARICOM Secretariat, which, is part of the news a lot these days, unfortunately. But they have also been a part of this journey with us with respect to this partial scope trade agreement. Let's not also leave out national level leadership. May not be convenient to every perspective, but in 2017, Mr. President, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, led a delegation to Santiago, Chile. And there's no coincidence in the strengthened trajectory since then that has brought us to this. I was there as well. I was there as well. Then as ambassador, I wasn't the minister. So my predecessor was also part of that delegation, and I give respect to him, Dennis Moses. So that's how the thing works. So he led a delegation to Santiago, Chile in 2017, an official visit, met with then President Michelle Bachelet of Chile, and laid some of the groundwork for all of this. This was a Herculean task, not the drafting of the bill. The work done, the various rounds of negotiation, not easy, lots of considerations, lots of stakeholders. The Trinidad and Tobago society is not an easy society, vigorous, lots of stakeholders, and a weighing of interests, but with ready and eager and experienced partners on the Chilean side that really enabled us to bring it to completion. A key name that should not also be neglected is the former Minister of Trade and Industry, the Honorable Paula Gopi Schoon, who really brought out a very strong trade flavor and sense of history, and was sort of the shepherd for this process over the years as well. So I just want to paint as complete a picture as I can, and you would notice, Mr. President, I didn't just mention P&M names, but try to paint a broader picture of the participants in this particular exercise. So, Mr. President, I just want to give a few other observations. Now, I want to take you back to, we had a round of political consultations with the Republic of Chile in 2017. Now, just as a marker, I was ambassador between 2016 and August 2020. So these are things that I participated in and had a first-hand witness. A round of political consultations in 2017. We signed a bilateral agreement for exemption of visas for holders of official and diplomatic passports in 2019. We signed a memorandum of understanding on cooperation and development of intellectual property. And I know some senators were very keen on that. That occurred also in 2017. And then in 2020, there was a major step in October of 2020 when we signed the General Framework Agreement for the negotiation of the Partial Scope Trade Agreement. That's in 2020. It did take some years. COVID-19 was an intervening factor, but Paula Gopiskun signed that framework agreement in 2020, and then in 2025 signed the final agreement, the Partial Scope Trade Agreement in 2025, Mr. President. There was also a joint declaration in 2017 between President Bachelet and Prime Minister Rowley. So just to give a sense of some of the other elements in our diplomatic contact, engagement, memorandum of understanding, and agreements. Mr. President, so I mentioned there were several rounds of negotiations. Chile has been, in a broader sense, also good to Trinidad and Tobago. I mentioned some of the diplomatic training. There's also been training in disaster risk management. Sad to say, Chile has had a lot of experience with some of the worst natural disasters humanity has had to confront. And that has built in them resilience and expertise, which they've been happy to share with us and others. They have a natural expertise in the Spanish language. They've been happy to share that with us, working to train public servants and others, even in the private sector. Private citizens have been able to benefit from Spanish language training as well via the Chilean embassy here and the Chilean diplomats. They've also been very supportive of candidatures. So when Trinidad and Tobago mounts a candidature, we found Chile. And I want to make the point, across administrations, even on the Chilean side. So sometimes we get a little carried away, which is left wing, which is right wing. At the end of the day, a society has a culture, an ethos, which defines it. And so with respect to Chile, we found them over the years to be a very reliable partner in that regard. Very supportive of Trinidad and Tobago's candidatures, whether it's the Steel Pan, World Steel Pan Day, whether it's our General Assembly candidature, we'll see on other candidatures, but they've generally been very supportive. Mr. President, the Minister did give some of the more specific benefits. Maybe I should just mention a few. With respect to the energy sector, I think it's very clear. Chile is a very important market for LNG and some of the other energy products. There's opportunity for that to expand and be deepened depending on how we are able to expand and deepen the energy sector of Trinidad and Tobago. We will need reliable markets. A large part of that 2017 trip was to secure the LNG market, and that was a successful endeavor. With respect to the manufacturing sector, Mr. President, it really sells itself. There's opportunity for innovators or exporters or manufacturers in Chile. It's a huge consumer market with potential doors to be open to other neighboring countries as well, with particular attraction for reduced customs duties, an environment of a favorable taxation regime, etc. And as I mentioned, the possibility of accessing cheap inputs from Chile for our manufacturing sector. We have to keep a close eye on the mining sector as well, even down to the level of, our jewelers and artisans and so on. Things like silver and other minerals are very much in good supply from a country like Chile. Agriculture, Chile is a powerhouse. And again, it's just how we manage that with the aim not to suppress or strangle our agricultural sector, but potentially to, well, first of all, to enhance the food input for Trinidad and Tobago, but also to benefit our domestic agricultural sector as well. And the Ministry of Agriculture was very much a part of this journey as well and helped steer us with a number of the particulars. So some of those potential pitfalls were well in the contemplation of the technocrats, and therefore the specifics of the schedule, etc., really are aimed to secure the interests of Trinidad and Tobago. That really was the mandate, and I believe it was certainly fleshed out as well. So those were some of the bigger sectors. And then, of course, there's the services industry as well, which I wouldn't dwell on too much. But Chile has a very strong public transport service and other elements that, at minimum, technical cooperation can be further expanded, and there's a lot that we can learn from them in the services sector. But I always say, as we are patriots, there's much that they can learn from us as well in things to do, things not to do, and so on. So, Mr. President, that's a little review of some of the benefits. I don't think any reasonable view can posit that we will be net losers in this endeavor. It's very important that we've now brought into legal effect this agreement. I once again want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that went into it. And Mr. President, I just want to spend a few moments to debunk any view out there that we can close one door and open another and then say that we are serving the best interests of Trinidad and Tobago. So it's really a note of caution. I mean, this debate is occurring in a particular context, which I wouldn't go too deeply into. But I know that the diplomats across the region and our trade practitioners, the manufacturing sector and others, are experiencing great anxiety and trepidation. And if we start where I began, on building and healing and uniting, the emphasis at the end of the day, once we get the egos out of the way and so on, must be on how we can work together to secure the jobs of people working in wherever, Angostura, or working in Cannings, or the Kiss Baking Company, or anyone who produces a product and wishes to export it. What we've learned is the shorter the supply line, the more resilient it should be. The pandemic taught us that if you're sourcing material from the other side of the world, or if you're supplying materials to the other products to the other side of the world, there's some vulnerability. Chile is much closer. One of the avenues that has to be looked at is the transportation linkages. It's far from ideal between South America and Trinidad and Tobago, but there are commercial implications, etc. So Chile is much closer than on the other side of the world, but we should never forget the regional environment. So just perish the thought that we can sacrifice in some way the the nearest market and compensate. It does not work like that, Mr. President, and it's our responsibility as policymakers to jealously guard all the gains that were made in the past whilst opening new avenues for the future. And it may seem, again, the minister isn't around, it may seem like a conundrum or a riddle that's difficult to solve. Mr. President, I don't believe that it is. There are enough experienced diplomats, permanent secretaries, former and retired permanent secretaries, retired ambassadors. One was recalled, some of them are recalled, and still in good fighting form, who can assist Trinidad and Tobago in this regard. So I just want, without going too deeply into the challenges with the CARICOM and the CARICOM Secretariat, to just put that note within this debate, while celebrating these advances, it behooves us, we have a responsibility not to erode other arenas of progress. I took note of the minister's comment in his piloting, talking about the foreign policy direction. I guess this wasn't the debate for him to really elaborate it fully. What is the foreign policy direction? I guess you'd need much more time to do that. But I did note the phrase stronger, safer, and more prosperous. Sounds good, Mr. President. I think a lot of today's debate would focus on the last phrasing in that, more prosperous. And, well, I believe the words that I just uttered would stand in that regard, just with respect to our responsibility. Mr. President, those are some of the submissions I would have wished to make in this debate. Personally, I have very good memories of Chile, and if we can bring these two nations even closer together, it would be something very important for us. The other thing that they share with us is a love of football. I see Senator Charles smiling a little bit. So one of my dreams that I wasn't able to achieve it would have been international friendly between Chile and Trinidad and Tobago. Now might be a good time, Mr. President, to push for that, because Chile is they're not at their strongest level. And they're certainly in the men's football team, and maybe we would have a chance. And that's the other thing, their ambassadors tend to also be good footballers as well. So I don't know if that's a criterion we are applying. In fact, the ambassador of Chile was part of a diplomatic football team that we had assembled that played a charity match against a TTMA team. So in that way, and this was, when was it? 2020, I think it's 2024. And so it's a sort of foreshadowing this. You had the ambassador of Chile on the field, a few of others as well, on the field with the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, doing battle on the pitch for a good cause. And here we are now, our two teams, Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile, having engaged in a different kind of exchange, hard work and negotiation over years, through COVID, et cetera, took a little bit long, was culminated in 2025, and we are now able to join together in the Senate, and hopefully our people, our exporters, our manufacturers will reap the benefits of the work that those that came before. So, Mr. President, those are my submissions. I really want to commend this agreement, commend this bill to the Senate, and to indicate my support. Thank you very much.
Senator Dr. Attzs.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to contribute to this debate on the partial scope trade agreement bill reflecting collaboration between the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile. Mr. President, as you know, we received fairly short notice on this particular matter, but I felt it was sufficiently important that I make some summary points, very brief contribution today, on the economic implications of this partial scope trade agreement on the economic trajectory for Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. President, I wish to thank the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs for providing some clarity and for going through the 13 chapters of this agreement and some of the finer details contained in the agreement. And he located his contribution in the context of trade liberalization, which is part of the architecture of economic liberalization. So I want to thank him for setting that stage. And I wish to say from the outset, I want to lend my unequivocal support in principle for trade agreements that expand opportunities for our local producers, that allow us to diversify our markets, and that position Trinidad and Tobago more strategically within the global economy. Minister Sobers would have spoken about the geopolitical challenges and the government's thrust to position Trinidad and Tobago to ride those geopolitical waves, so to speak. As a small open economy, international engagement is not optional, it is imperative for us. But such engagements must be strategic, evidence-based, and aligned with our economic realities. This bill, particularly through Clause 4, which gives the agreement the force of law, is not merely procedural. It establishes a binding economic commitment, one that will directly affect our government's revenue. The competitiveness of our local industries and our balance of payments, that is the flow of our foreign exchange into and out of the country, is something that we cannot ignore. Mr. President, before I go on further, I want to endorse some of the sentiments raised both by Minister Sobers and by the Honorable Senator Dr. Amery Browne in terms of Chile being a good fit for us. And I want to highlight one of the things that Senator Browne spoke of is Chile's resilience and the opportunity for us, separate and apart from what is detailed in this bill in terms of the trade in goods, the technical capacity of Chile, and as he mentioned, the issue of resilience in terms of disaster risk management. I was thrown back to one of my previous lives when I did work on disaster risk management, and one of the things that I had the benefit of learning is that in 2010, when both Chile and Haiti experienced devastating earthquakes, upwards of 6 or 7 on the Richter scale, Chile had minimal impact, while Haiti, as we know, was absolutely devastated. And that is testimony to the extent to which issues of disaster risk management and disaster resilience and disaster risk reduction are embedded in Chile's systems. So that is one of the positive outcomes, positive externalities that we in Trinidad and Tobago can also benefit from in terms of this agreement. But the agreement focuses particularly on trade. Minister Sobers identified, as outlined in the preamble and the Article 1.3 of the agreement, that the agreement seeks to do 3 things: to expand trade in goods, to remove barriers to trade, and to promote economic development, all of which are absolutely essential for Trinidad and Tobago as we navigate our current economic circumstances. So these are all commendable objectives. In simple terms, the partial scope trade agreement selectively reduces tariffs or taxes on imported goods, but on a defined list of products rather than opening up all trade across the board. The idea is straightforward. So you reduce the tariffs, you reduce the taxes on some products, not all, and you create some opportunities while managing the risks. So the idea is that you want to facilitate flows between trade flows between Chile and Trinidad and Tobago. But, Mr. President, while the bill gives legal effect to the agreement, to my mind, it does not sufficiently illuminate the current structure of trade between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile. And I was looking forward to some of those details to come from the Honourable Minister. Nor does it clearly signal which sectors stand to gain or lose. There was a lot of conversation around Chile's agriculture sector, Chile's mineral sector, the exportation. But in terms of the Trinidad and Tobago sector, some mention was made, manufacturing loosely, joinery, I think some other things were mentioned, non-energy exports, some very generic references were made, and I would like to see some more conversation, some more detail coming out in terms of which sectors from Trinidad and Tobago. I am happy to say, and I should add quickly, to say that I took note, and I'm aware that the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association led a delegation to Chile last year, so I imagine that there is some granular details that are available from that trade mission that will help our business sector navigate and leverage the benefits from this agreement. Mr. President, it would be no surprise if I came to this contribution, if my contribution did not focus on the bill from an economic perspective. And I need to pose some questions which were not immediately clear from the documentation before us. We need to ask ourselves, are we liberalizing areas where we are already competitive, or are we opening up sectors where domestic producers are vulnerable? Remember, this partial agreement, this partial scope trade agreement, allows for us to reduce the taxes on goods that we will import from Chile, and there will be reciprocity in Chile. But we need to ask ourselves, if those goods that we are going to be importing in Trinidad and Tobago are going to pose some vulnerability to our producers. Passing mention was made of our farmers, and they need not be worried about the agriculture produce coming in from Chile. But the fact of the matter is, unless we manage this arrangement and this relationship, there may be some vulnerabilities that may be inadvertently caused, and some chinks in our agriculture sector armor that may be exposed as a result of this relationship. So I'm just flagging that as something that we would need to be mindful of. Because without a clear mapping of these product lines against our existing trade patterns and production capacity, we risk entering an agreement where the benefits are uncertain, but the exposure and the vulnerability is real. So, Mr. President, while the intent is sound, the real question is this. Signing the trade agreements is one thing, but benefiting from them in a tangible way is quite another. Remember, one of the objectives is to promote economic development. So at the end of the day, one of the tangible outcomes from this agreement should be that we should be seeing our economy growing because of this arrangement, and that contributing to our economic development. And it is on this point, Mr. President, that the academic evidence becomes critical. And I'm sorry my colleague, Senator Smith, is not in the room, because he would be pleased to know that based on research undertaken at the UWI, the University of the West Indies, of course, the Department of Economics, no doubt, that research shows that while partial scope trade agreements are designed to expand trade, the outcomes for Trinidad and Tobago, based on historical evidence of these partial trade agreements, partial scope trade agreements, the outcomes of Trinidad and Tobago have been mixed. So that research examines what is called export potential, essentially looking at whether our industries are positioned to take advantage of new market access. So we know we have some capacity, but is the enabling environment in place, and are they positioned to take advantage of these agreements? And the key takeaway from that research is this, and I just called your name, Senator Smith, and there you appeared. So I was just talking about research from the University of the West Indies, Department of Economics. And the key takeaway from the research is that access alone is not enough. We must ensure that our counterparts in the manufacturing sector have the capacity to leverage the access. And the research from UWI, to which I'm referencing, suggests that in several cases, imports into Trinidad and Tobago have increased significantly. We are buying more from the partner country, but our exports have not been able to keep pace. And that results in widening trade imbalances, and this is something that we need to look at. In fact, Mr. President, the data suggests that in some bilateral relationships, Trinidad and Tobago has moved from a trade surplus, where we are exporting more than we're importing and therefore earning foreign exchange. We've moved from trade surpluses to trade deficits over time, so that we are now spending more foreign exchange than we're actually earning. So even where trade surpluses exist, as currently is the case with Chile, these surpluses remain volatile and inconsistent. Mr. President, both the Honorable Minister and Senator Browne spoke about the kinds of products that we can benefit from in terms of this agreement and the relationship with Chile. Primarily energy-based products such as, primarily energy-based exports such as ammonia, methanol, and urea, alongside manufactured and agro-processed goods such as beverages, food preparations, and household items. Those are some of the things that we can comfortably export to Chile. But what is striking is not so much a list of products, but the gap between potential and performance. In several of these sectors, exports to Chile remain minimal or even non-existent, despite our clear productive capacity. And this gap between volume of exports and productive capacity suggests that the issue is not market access, it is the readiness of our markets to be able to export the volumes that are required for us to benefit fully from this arrangement. So unless that gap and those gaps are addressed, the benefits of this agreement will remain theoretical while the risks become very real. Mr. President, at this juncture, I think it's important that we consider the economic heart of this bill that is before us. Clause 5 and Article 2.2 commit Trinidad and Tobago to phased tariff reductions. In practice, that is a form of structured trade liberalization, and it is almost irreversible once it's enacted. The evidence of uneven trade performance must therefore be read alongside the reality of increased import incentives. So if our imports from Chile increase faster than exports, as the evidence suggests may sometimes be the case, then there will be a consequent demand for foreign exchange. And that brings us to an important question: not to dismiss the validity and the potential for this agreement to bring benefits to Trinidad and Tobago, but in developing the architecture around it and the operationalization around it, have we asked ourselves what is likely to be the foreign exchange impact on this agreement on the economy of Trinidad and Tobago? Does this agreement align with our balance of payments realities? And our balance of payments is simply how the inflows and outflows of foreign exchange take place. There is no secret. Everyone in this Senate and everyone in the country knows that we're facing a foreign exchange crunch in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have to be mindful when we're opening the gates in these kinds of trade arrangements that it does not further exacerbate a challenge that we're already facing. Because, Mr. President, trade policy cannot be divorced from our macroeconomic realities, and the foreign exchange crisis is a very clear, poignant example of our macroeconomic challenges that we face. Mr. President, the evidence also suggests that Trinidad and Tobago has low levels of what economists call intra-industry trade with partners like Chile. Put simply, if you have strong trading relationships, countries both export and import similar types of goods. But in our case, the pattern is often one-directional. We import, but we do not export at the same scale. And when that happens, the potential benefits from these kinds of trading arrangements become uneven. Mr. President, I think it's important at this juncture that we understand the economic reality of the partner we are engaging. Again, I support the view that Chile is an excellent trade partner for Trinidad and Tobago, but I think it's important that we also understand the nature of trade. When we say that Chile is a significant trading partner, I think it's important for us to digest that. Chile is a highly export-oriented economy, as both the Minister of CARICOM, Foreign and CARICOM Affairs noted, and also Senator Amery Browne, highly export-oriented economy where exports play a central role in driving their growth. Their exports are significant in their growth, their gross development product, their GDP. Data suggests, so Minister Sobers would have quoted that for Trinidad and Tobago, between 2020 and 2024, I think he said we exported a total of $710.6 million TT dollars, particularly in terms of exports, energy-based exports. And I want to juxtapose that to data for February of 2026, just February of 2026. Chile exported to the tune of $10.6 billion US dollars. So that is not quite the same level of export in terms of their capacity to export as opposed to ours. And this is not cumulative data. This is just for the month of February 2026. Chile's economy is built on strong export sectors, as mentioned both by Minister Sobers and Senator Browne, mining with copper alone accounting for a significant share of exports, alongside, as has been mentioned, a very advanced agriculture sector, as well as food processing and manufacturing. In fact, exports, as I mentioned earlier, are a significant part of Chile's economic activity, supported by an extensive network of trade agreements across major global markets: China, the United States, Asia, Europe, to name a few. Chile exports to over 180 countries and has deep penetration into these markets to which they export, as opposed to Trinidad and Tobago, where I agree that economic diversification has to be the thrust moving forward, but our export base is a lot narrower and more concentrated, with limited diversification and, of course, the ongoing foreign exchange constraints that I mentioned. So when we speak of liberalizing trade between these two economies, it is incumbent on us to recognize that we are engaging with a country that is structurally more export-ready, more diversified, and more integrated into global markets. Under Article 2.3 of the agreement, Trinidad and Tobago is required to accord national treatment to Chilean goods. In simple terms, this means that imported goods must be treated no less favorably than domestically produced goods. This is to ensure fairness, appropriately so, but it also creates a reality. Our domestic producers must now compete on equal terms with firms from larger, more diversified and export-ready economies, where perhaps I'm sure they're enjoying what we call in economics economies of scale, so they might be able to produce things cheaper than we can. And let us be honest, as we say in local parlance, donkeys say the world not level. And in this case, it is not just about fairness, it is about capacity, and we are not engaging from the same level of export readiness, production scale, or market reach. Chile has a significant advantage over Trinidad and Tobago. Again, Mr. President, this is not to say that there is not merit to the agreement. I'm simply flagging some issues that I think in the operationalization, we need to be mindful of how we establish the architecture for Trinidad and Tobago to gain the maximum or to leverage the maximum amount of benefit from this agreement. Mr. President, the agreement undoubtedly, I said that my comments would be brief because I do in fact support the agreement, and I'm simply highlighting, I think, some issues that should be taken into consideration. Mr. President, the agreement undoubtedly holds promise. It can open doors and create opportunities for producers and exporters, but market access, I repeat, is not the same as market penetration. If our firms are not export ready, and based on the contingent that the TTMA would have led to Chile recently in 2025, so they would have a sense of what is available and what is the scope for us to benefit from this agreement. If our firms are not export ready, if competitiveness is lacking, and if our foreign exchange constraints remain unresolved, then the agreement may inadvertently deepen our import dependence, because we'll now be importing cheaper goods, rather than be used as a transformative tool for our economy. Trade agreements of themselves do not create competitiveness. They reveal who is competitive and who is not. The central question, therefore, is not whether we sign agreements, but whether we are prepared to benefit from them, whether we have the capacity to benefit from these agreements. So governments may negotiate, but it is the businesses that must be supported by the right enabling environment to allow them to deliver the results that will redound to the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Sustainable prosperity requires strategic positioning, and this is a strategic partnership. But strategic positioning also demands economic readiness. We need to ensure that our manufacturers who will participate in this agreement, they are in a position, they are export ready, and they are in a position to capitalize on this opportunity. Again, I state unequivocally that I support any arrangement that seeks to improve the well-being of our citizens, but we must ensure, Mr. President, that such arrangements truly deliver on that promise. Mr. President, with those few words, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this bill.
Thank you very much. Senator Anthony Vieira, SC.
Thank you, Mr. President. Like Senators Browne and Dr. Attzs, I too rise to lend my support to this bill. At the outset, I wish to say that legislation such as this deserves careful attention from this chamber. Trade agreements, even those which appear modest in length, often have consequences that extend well beyond the text placed before us. They shape the environment in which businesses operate, influence investment decisions, and define how nations position themselves within an increasingly interconnected global economy. For that reason, it's important that we examine both the legal effect of this bill and the broader strategic context within which it sits. Having done so, my view is that this legislation is a sensible and constructive step, one which reflects a growing and mutually beneficial relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile, as we have heard from the Honorable Minister, a country with whom we have enjoyed warm and friendly relations, warm and friendly diplomatic relations for 60 years. At the same time, like all legislation of this nature, its ultimate success will depend not merely on the passing of the act, but on how effectively we implement it and how prepared our businesses are to take advantage of the opportunities it creates. And I think that's the point that Senator Attzs was trying to really emphasize. So what's the purpose and legal effect of this bill? Essentially, it seeks to give effect to a partial scope trade agreement between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile. The operative provisions of the bill are relatively straightforward. The legislation provides that the agreement itself will have the force of law in Trinidad and Tobago. It further empowers the President to grant tariff preferences to goods originating from Chile, specifically those goods listed in the schedule to the agreement and which satisfy the applicable rules of origin. Additionally, the bill provides for two important regulatory mechanisms. First, it allows the minister responsible for trade to amend the schedule by order where amendments to the agreement have been accepted by Trinidad and Tobago. And secondly, it allows the minister to make regulations for the purpose of giving effect to the agreement. Both powers are subject to the negative resolution of Parliament, ensuring that Parliament retains oversight over the implementation of the agreement. In essence, the bill establishes the domestic legal framework through which the trade commitments between our two countries can be implemented. The bill offers a strategic opportunity for trade diversification. It offers an important opportunity for this country to diversify its economic partnerships. As the Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs pointed out, for decades, our trade patterns have been heavily oriented towards a limited number of markets. There is nothing inherently wrong with strong trading relationships. Indeed, they are vital. But economic resilience requires diversification. Diversification of markets, diversification of products, and diversification of economic partnerships. In that context, Chile represents a particularly interesting and valuable partner. Chile is widely regarded as one of the most open and stable economies in Latin America. It has built a reputation for economic transparency, sound institutions, and a commitment to international trade. As we have heard, Chile also possesses one of the most extensive networks of free trade agreements in the world, connecting it to a vast portion of global GDP. In other words, engagement with Chile places Trinidad and Tobago within a networked commercial environment rather than an isolated bilateral relationship. Now, what makes Chile so special? Besides the fact that vast areas of Chile are considered breathtakingly beautiful due to extreme, contrasting, raw natural landscapes that stretch for over 4,000 kilometers, ranging from the world's driest desert, the Atacama, to massive southern glaciers, and the Torres del Paine National Park in Patagonia, widely regarded as one of the most beautiful places on Earth, with vibrant emerald lakes, glaciers, fjords, and abundant wildlife. It is useful to consider the characteristics of Chile's economy. Chile is a significant exporter of natural resources such as copper and lithium, both of which are central to modern technologies, including electric vehicles and renewable energy systems. At the same time, Chile has been expanding rapidly in sectors such as technology, renewable energy, and innovation-driven industries. Its open market policies and business-friendly environment have attracted considerable foreign investment. So this makes Chile a reliable and sophisticated trading partner. For Trinidad and Tobago, engagement with such an economy provides opportunities not only in traditional trade, but also in areas such as technology collaboration, innovation, and value-added manufacturing. Here, one of the most practical features of the agreement is the reduction or elimination of tariffs on certain goods. Some products will benefit from immediate tariff elimination, upon entry into force. Others will move gradually towards duty-free status through schedule reductions over time. This phased approach is important. It allows businesses to plan ahead. It allows producers to adapt. And it provides a predictable timetable within which exporters can develop market strategies. The agreement also includes provisions aimed at reducing non-tariff barriers, including commitments relating to national treatment, import licensing transparency, and the regulation of administrative charges. Such provisions may sound technical, but they are extremely important. While at least one global leader stakes his reputation and policy on tariffs, it's important to recognize that in international trade, tariffs are only part of the story. Equally important are the regulatory and administrative systems that govern how goods move across borders. Transparent and predictable procedures are therefore essential for businesses seeking to operate in international markets. It is significant to note that the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile is not restricted to trade in goods. In fact, one of the most interesting aspects of this partnership is the cooperation that already exists in the field of intellectual property and innovation. It may come as a surprise to many, but Chile and this country have had a long relationship in relation to intellectual property cooperation. Indeed, the Intellectual Property Office of Trinidad and Tobago has a memorandum of understanding with Chile's National Institute of Industrial Property. Under that arrangement, Chile has provided patent search and examination services in English to Trinidad and Tobago, and this collaboration has extended also to training programs aimed at strengthening the capacity of our own intellectual property office. Such cooperation is significant because in today's world, economic growth is increasingly driven not only by physical goods, but by knowledge, creativity, and innovation. Patents, trademarks, and intellectual property rights are therefore central to the development of modern economies. The cooperation between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile in this field reflects a forward-looking partnership, one that recognizes the importance of building an innovation ecosystem capable of supporting entrepreneurs, researchers, and inventors. The collaboration between our two countries also extends into the academic sphere. Institutions such as the University of Trinidad and Tobago have engaged with the intellectual property framework developed through cooperation with Chile, with the aim of strengthening innovation policy and encouraging the commercialization of research. This is an important development. For too long, innovation emerging from universities and research institutions in our region has struggled to move from the laboratory into the marketplace. A stronger intellectual property framework can help bridge that gap by ensuring that innovations can be properly protected, commercialized, and brought to market. Yet another aspect of connectivity, and I would say pun intended, connectivity relating to aviation. An air service agreement will or should be an important dimension of this growing relationship. I have had the privilege of serving as chairman of the Air Service Agreements Negotiating Committee. And from that vantage point, I have seen firsthand how international agreements in aviation form an essential part of economic diplomacy. And this may be a useful point to recognize the Honorable Mr. Permanent Secretary Randall Karim from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, who was also a very valued member of that committee. Trade agreements facilitate the movement of goods, but air service agreements facilitate the movement of people, ideas, investment, and opportunity. Negotiations between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile regarding an air services agreement have been ongoing for several years. These discussions have involved detailed technical engagement, and I understand have now reached an advanced stage. And I want to echo what Dr. Browne, Senator Dr. Browne said. When I engaged with the Chilean ambassador and the Chilean embassy staff, I found them not just to be extremely personable, but very competent, very knowledgeable about this country's culture and business, and they were committed to fostering better relations between our two countries. The aviation sector itself is a major contributor to Chile's economy. According to data from International Air Transport Association, aviation contributes approximately United States dollars 7.9 billion to Chile's GDP, and it supports over 200,000 jobs. Chile's passenger traffic has also been expanding significantly in recent years. Such developments reflect a dynamic and globally connected aviation sector. And the same can be said of Copa, how Copa in Panama, and how that airline contributes to the Panamanian economy. When I engaged in the negotiations with the Chilean ambassador, we saw great potential for traffic from Chile to Trinidad, from Trinidad to Africa, Central and North America, that Trinidad and Tobago could become an aviation hub, piggybacking on the aviation sector from Chile. And I think that still remains a great possibility. Improved connectivity between our two countries has the potential to strengthen tourism, business travel, cargo transport, and investment flows. As I see it, taken together, these developments create several opportunities for Trinidad and Tobago. First, they provide new avenues for export diversification. Secondly, they encourage the development of knowledge-based industries, particularly those linked to intellectual property and innovation. Thirdly, they strengthen our integration with Latin America, a region with which Trinidad and Tobago has long-standing cultural and historical ties, but which remains underutilized as an economic partner. So there's a lot to be said in favor of this legislation today. Now, while I support this legislation, it bears emphasizing that it is appropriate and important for Parliament to maintain careful oversight over its implementation. Trade agreements must always be implemented in a way that ensures that domestic producers are not placed at an unfair disadvantage and that businesses are properly supported in accessing new markets. Delegated powers under this bill, such as the ability of the minister to amend schedules or to make regulations, are common in trade legislation, but they underscore the importance of continued parliamentary scrutiny. What we are doing today is creating a portal for legal opportunities, but opportunities alone are not enough. Businesses need to be aware of the new market access possibilities. They need to be supported in meeting export standards, and they must be equipped to navigate logistics, certification requirements, and international marketing. In other words, the legislation opens a door, but businesses and institutions must walk through that door. Before I conclude, let me share that I just came back from a lovely Easter holiday in Mexico. Now, what strikes me every time I visit our Latin neighbors, whether it's Mexico, Panama, the Dominican Republic, or Costa Rica, is the very strong sense of camaraderie between Central and South American states based on a shared Latin American identity, anchored by the Spanish and Portuguese languages, shared history, and cultural traits like strong family values, religious traditions, and popular culture. People from those countries interact with each other like friendly cousins. Now, I share this as, on the one hand, it's important for us in Trinidad to be mindful of that shared heritage and connectivity because we are outliers in a sense. Also, on the other hand, I offer that insight as a mirror because it enables us to appreciate and to value more deeply the similar sense of camaraderie which exists within CARICOM and the English-speaking Caribbean, even though at times such may appear fractured and even insular. The fact is that even though our Caribbean family is small in the grand scheme of things, there is a deep shared identity rooted in common colonial history, language, and cultural expressions like cricket and music. I was taught during the 2 years I did, during the 2 years I was in Form 6 at St. Mary's College by Dr. C.V. Gocking, a former Chief Education Officer, Oxford scholar, and historian. He was a committed federationalist, and he saw Caribbean regionalization as essential for the survival of our nations. He recognized that our countries are microstates with small populations and limited resources. He recognized that we share and face the same challenges and the same structural disadvantages. And he understood that no single island can solve existential threats like climate change and economic marginalization and other shared challenges alone. And so if Europe and Latin America can see the importance of regionalism, who is we? By speaking with a single voice, microstates gain significantly more leverage in institutional forums like the United Nations and the WTO. Because of economies of scale, regional integration through the CSME allows our small businesses to access larger unified market, helping us become more competitive globally. Our shared institutions allow us to share the high cost of essential services, such as the Caribbean Examinations Council, the CCJ, UE, and the Security and Disaster Response. The Honorable Minister spoke about our new foreign policy orientation and that our exports are disproportionately skewed to North America and CARICOM. He also put on record that we got CARICOM certification under Article 83 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. While I support this legislation and the valid viewpoint that Trinidad and Tobago must pursue strategic bilateral interests with countries throughout the Americas, I'm also keenly aware that our relationship with CARICOM remains an indispensable pillar of national stability and growth. In conclusion, the bill before us represents a measured and pragmatic step towards strengthening economic relations between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile. It builds upon an existing foundation of cooperation in intellectual property, innovation, and institutional engagement. It aligns with the broader goal of economic diversification. And it reflects the reality that in today's world, economic success depends on building partnerships that extend across multiple sectors. I agree with the Honourable Minister that it is important to reduce our dependence on traditional partners. For these reasons, I'm pleased to lend my support to this legislation. But I do want to underscore that CARICOM remains our largest market for manufactured goods, also for the domestic construction and the food beverage sectors. CARICOM remains a vital anchor that allows our businesses to scale beyond the local market. Regional integration is in our country's national interest and a useful segue to global cooperation. There's a direct correlation between prosperity and regional cooperation. As such, it's important for our foreign policy to maintain a principled balance. And with that, I thank you.
Senator Francis Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the debate on the partial scope trade agreement bill between the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Republic of Chile. I would like to start with congratulations to two administrations, the present and the previous, for bringing us to this point. Sometimes in the hurly-burly of debate, we forget that we need to be generous in remembering those who brought us here. I should note that I voted against debating this bill at this time, and this needs a bit of explanation. We were advised yesterday for today for a bill of this import. It did not require urgency, and so in very mild protest, I would say, Mr. President, we really have to do better than that if we expect considered debate in the House. Now, the agreement represents more than a legal instrument. In some ways, it is a strategic direction, is a decision about the strategic direction of our economy. Whether we choose to remain narrowly dependent on energy exports or whether we choose to actively position ourselves within the wider Latin American economic space. With that in mind, my contribution will focus on three areas. The first is the advantages of this agreement from a policy and business perspective. The second are the risks and concerns that must not be overlooked, which some of my colleagues addressed, but which we need to address. And the third are some initial practical recommendations, well, I hope practical, so that the agreement delivers real and measurable benefits to Trinidad and Tobago. And within that, some of the things I would like to see or suggest. So, to the first point, the potential advantages. From a policy standpoint, the agreement is timely and potentially useful. I'm not necessarily quite in the cheering section for, yeah, this is the absolute thing we must do, but I can see its value for the long term. Its value comes with export diversification. For decades, our trade with Chile, as with other countries, has been overwhelmingly concentrated in energy, primarily liquefied natural gas and petrochemicals. This agreement provides preferential access over several hundred Trinidad and Tobago products, creating a pathway to expand into manufacturing, agro-processing, and value-added goods. For policymakers, this aligns with a long-term national objective to diversify the economy. The second potential advantage is access to a stable and high-value market. Chile is considered stable, and it is a high-income LATAM economy. Preferential access to such a market offers our business the opportunity to earn foreign exchange from a more resilient and perhaps in some ways a more predictable and hopefully profitable demand base. For the business community, this is not merely about market access, it is also about market quality. A third advantage is it improves competitiveness through tariff reduction. Now, that could be a double-edged sword. Removal or reduction of tariffs enhance the competitiveness of Trinidad and Tobago exports. In sectors where our firms already possess technical capabilities, chemicals, petrochemicals, processing of some foods, some construction materials, there's a real opportunity potentially to expand. The agreement is our first meaningful, as noted, bilateral trade agreement with a South American country of Chile's scale. And just for context, Chile is 10 times the size, in fact, greater than 10 times the size of Trinidad and Tobago. It provides a platform for deeper engagement with a wider region. And from a policy perspective, it strengthens potentially our geopolitical and economic footprint beyond traditional markets. And lastly, it strengthens our energy trade. Even as we seek to diversify, we have to recognize that energy remains our economic backbone. And this agreement can help secure and stabilize demand for our energy exports, which remain critical for national revenue. But in saying all of this, there are risks. And in being positive, I would not want to simply skate over these risks. The opportunities are clear, but we must approach this agreement with realism and prudence. And what are some of the risks? A risk of increased import competition. The agreement provides for reduced tariffs for Chilean goods entering Trinidad and Tobago. Chile is highly competitive in agriculture and in a number of manufacturing goods. Local producers, particularly small and medium enterprises, may face displacement if they are not adequately prepared. And so with that, I'm saying to the government, we need to take note of where those risks lie so that we could take the necessary actions to mitigate. The second potential risk is the structural trade imbalance. There's a real possibility that our exports will remain concentrated in energy, while imports from Chile is diversified into our economy. In such a scenario, the agreement, as noted by my colleague, could result in increased imports without corresponding export growth, thereby worsening the trade imbalance, the national trade imbalance. The third is one that will speak closely to the hearts of everybody, including our Minister of Trade, who have worked in local firms and tried to export. Access does not equal participation. Many of our firms face constraints, limited scales of production, high operating costs, limited experience in export markets, and for some, the challenge in meeting international standards. Without addressing these constraints, the benefits of this agreement may remain largely theoretical, and in fact, if imports from Chile start to crowd out local production, it creates a different problem here. There are non-tariff barriers to consider. Even with tariffs reduced, barriers such as language, certification requirements, logistics, distribution, and the networks and ecosystems that are beneath these remain significant. And often, for those of us who have worked in exports, the real obstacle to trade are these, not necessarily tariffs. And then there is the adjustment cost for vulnerable sectors. Certain domestic industries may require time and support to adjust. Without appropriate measures, we risk undermining the sectors that we are seeking to develop. So, to the third part of my presentation, what must be done, or what might we want to consider doing? If this agreement is to succeed, it must be supported by what is not said so far in this House. What is the deliberate and coordinated action to gain the benefits and minimize the downside risk? In that light, I wish to suggest the following. This is an action that a government needs to take. How do we strengthen export capacity? As I always say, it takes two hands to clap. So the private sector has its own work to do in that regard. How do we move beyond policy statements and actively support exporters through access to affordable export financing, grants for certification and standards compliance, and technical support for product development? We have to ensure that our firms are not merely eligible for exports, but capable of exporting. How do we improve trade logistics and the facilitation that needs to underpin this? Reducing tariffs is insufficient if logistics remains costly and inefficient. We must improve port efficiency, and that is certainly starting with our ports. Streamlining customs processes, exploring more direct and cost-effective shipping arrangements to South America. Right now, when I did a quick scan, if I wanted to get goods from here into many of the ports in South America, one would truly struggle to do that versus the more traditional ports that were to the north and to the east of us. Did I have that right? Yes, to Europe. Competitiveness begins with the port. We need to think through how do we support vulnerable domestic industries that are worthwhile and need to be encouraged and kept. The agreement must not come at the expense of local enterprise. So, how are we going to monitor import surges? How are we going to utilize safeguard mechanisms where necessary, as provided for in the partial scope agreement? And how do we provide targeted support for sectors facing adjustment pressures? Let me stress, the objective is not protectionism. It is limited in time and scope, but it does require of us an orderly transition to encourage and enhance competitiveness. How do we build the market intelligence and the presence in Chile? The number of people in Trinidad and Tobago who have traveled to the south, and particularly to that far south, are not very many. We cannot export effectively to a market we do not understand. So how do we structure market intelligence for business, develop a stronger commercial presence in Chile, and actively promote the business matchmaking initiatives needed to underpin it? How do we invest in the human and institutional capacity? The language, and more especially the cultural barriers, are real. It's not just investing in business Spanish, but in export-ready programs and the institutional strengthening of our export promotion agencies, which right now need some strengthening. Ultimately, how do we encourage business partnerships? You know, there's a simple and often forgotten truth. Countries don't export. We talk statistics in terms of Trinidad and Tobago exports. Countries don't export. Who exports are companies. So how is the private sector working and encouraged by the government to act not in isolation? Businesses will need to form partnerships with Chilean firms, distributors, and others to collaborate locally to achieve scale. I remember when some firms were looking to expand into Jamaica, there was an active collaboration, and this is many years ago, that before they could have a full container load, you would have 2-3 firms contributing to getting that container fully loaded so that the cost could come down. Collaboration takes place in all kinds of amazing and sometimes very simple ways. And how do we invest in branding, quality, and differentiation? Aligning industrial trade policy with trade opportunities. Our companies will need to produce what the Chilean market demands. It sounds very simple. So how do we encourage export-oriented industries and production in the areas of high-demand goods in the Chilean market? And lastly, how do we establish a monitoring and evaluation mechanism and framework so that when we pass this legislation, we do not simply turn away. We should require periodic reporting on trade outcomes, sectorial performance reviews, and policy adjustments based on evidence. What would I like to see is how Trinidad and Tobago might turn this agreement from a trade risk, and the risks are real, into a national economic transformational tool. Turning this partial scope trade agreement with Chile into a national economic transformational tool will require a shift of all of us in mindset, from market access to production, exports, and competitiveness as an overall strategy. Right now, the risk, as stated by my colleague earlier, is that imports could rise faster than exports. And while one could extol the benefits in the fullness of time, we're dead. So how do we transform what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago so we retool our economy around exports? And I have some suggestions about how this can realistically be done. But I'm noting that the leader of government business needs to interrupt. Sir, let me give way to you.
Thank you kindly, Senator Lewis. Mr. President, at this point I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, April 21st, 2026 at 1:30 p.m., when we will complete the debate on the bill at hand. And we will also treat with the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill 2026, as well as the Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Amendment Bill 2026.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 21st of April, 2026 at 1:30 p.m. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Tuesday, April the 21st, 2026 at 1:30 p.m.